What's up, Doc Mike? Public Health on Call, by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Today's topic for March 30, 2021. How a former Twisted Sister ROADIE is getting thousands of people vaccinated every day. Thank you, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
Welcome to Season 3 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former Secretary of Maryland's Health Department. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to the public health news of the day through informative interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Today, I speak to Terry Sapp, the Public Health Emergency Coordinator for Baltimore County, Maryland. Terry is responsible for running the large vaccine distribution sites in the county, which are called pods. Before this job, Terry set up the venues for the heavy metal rock band known as Twisted Sister. Coincidence? Not at all. Let's listen. Terry Sapp, it is so great to have you here on the podcast. I want to ask you first, how long have you been preparing to create pods to distribute critical vaccines and medications to people in Baltimore County?
Well, I started here in Baltimore County in 2008 and pretty much started working on pod planning right away, since that's one of the key metrics that we're responsible for doing for our grant. But really, I didn't have a whole lot of time of preparation because H1N1 came along in 2009. And so that kind of was the foundation of our pods in Baltimore County for mass vaccinations. And we've been preparing for the next big thing ever since then. So we've been doing annual mass vaccination exercises every year since H1N1.
So while the rest of us have been living our lives for the last dozen years, you have been thinking about pods pretty much every day you go to work. Would that be fair to say?
I would say every day, but pretty close. I'd say definitely every flu season. So we use the flu season as our opportunity to hone our craft and test some of our plans and keep that muscle memory with all of our staff.
Got it. So take us inside the pods that you work in. The Baltimore County pods are already considered to be some of the most efficient and effective in the state of Maryland. You know, what would you see if we went together into one of them?
Well, what you would see is if you think of it almost like a watch mechanism, you have a lot of gears that all kind of lock together, and all the gears have to kind of turn in synchronization, because if any one gear gets stuck, if any one part of that pod starts to back up, it backs up the entire mechanism. So when the watch works well, when everything goes smooth, what you'll see is a constant flow of people walking through the pod. So even in the main queue that feeds into our registration area and then ultimately into our vaccination area and then ultimately into the observation area, what you see is, and what you hear is, the shuffling of feet. Our goal is to never have that line stop moving. So to me, the sound of shuffling feet is a positive sign that the pod is working and rolling along.
What are the signs that a pod is not working?
So, it's one of the things that I work very closely with our command staff to stress that is you have to kind of keep looking around that pod. Everything should be moving. So if you see any one part of your pod that's empty, for example, your queues in the mass vaccination area that we call chutes, if they're empty, you should next be looking at, well, is the feeder queue moving into that empty? Because if not, then you've got a bottleneck in between those two areas, which for us is registration. If both of those areas empty, I immediately will go into the next area, which is the feeder queue. If I don't have anybody in the feeder queue, then I kind of wonder, where is everybody? But if I have a long line outside and I have almost no lines inside, it's telltale. You've got a bottleneck somewhere along the line.
What are the other terms that you use other than shoots inside a pod?
I think I make some of these up as I go along, truthfully, but we call them shoots. They look kind of like, forgive me, folks, cattle chutes, because they move the people through. They don't give them an opportunity to move backwards, and they go where they need us to go. I call it the feeder queue. It's that main queue that feeds into the registration area. We have an observation area, obviously off to the side after they get vaccinated. So, we have these little areas of the pod, and the pod stands for point of dispensing or a mass vaccination site.
Great. Now, there was a nice Baltimore Sun article about your background before you got into emergency response and public health. Tell us about that.
So I'm a what they call a roadie, or I was a stagehand and a production assistant for Twisted Sister. So I spent a lot of time seeing how very large operations, these large music festivals all over the world operated, and they were very complex. They had a lot of moving parts, a lot of staff, a lot of logistics. And if you think of a rock concert, you load in a lot of equipment. You have a very short time to get everything set up. You have a very short window to get the doors open. You got to be on time. You move all these people through a ticketing process to get them into the concert in time so they can see the show. And then you have to manage that crowd inside, and then everything has to get torn down and loaded out. So a lot of these same principles have proven to be very handy and useful for pods and mass vaccination sites. It's really, to me, it's much more of a logistical operation than a clinical operation. And too often we focus so much on the clinical aspects of it and forget that about 90% of it is actually a logistical operation. So I make sure everything is on wheels, everything rolls in. My supplies, all my equipment are actually in road cases, which is the industry standard for music and entertainment. And, we've drilled it every year since H1N1 of how quickly can we roll into a space, set everything up, and get operating. We try to have a window of operation of about an hour for setup.
So going back to the music festivals, how many people would come into a music festival that you would need to prepare for?
Well, it varies. I mean, some of the global festivals could have 90,000 fans coming into a single gate, moving into a field for a large event. But what's important is that you'll have all these different logistical functions. So you'll have a production office, you'll have catering, you'll have transportation, you'll have supplies, you'll have runners, you'll have the operational folks, the ones that are up on the stage. You'll have stage managers keeping everything running on time. So a lot of that infrastructure, regardless of how small or how big, it's all there. And it's very similar to the instant command system that we use here in the United States in the fire service.
Interesting. So how many people are you moving through a pod for COVID vaccination now?
Right now in our largest pod, we're doing about around 500 to 600 per hour. So we run 5 hours. So our cap right now is 3,000 at our largest site. We find that by capping it at 5 hours, we reduce the amount of physical and mental fatigue on the staff. Because after 5 hours, both the physical act of drawing up syringes, as well as just the mental toll it takes to be in that kind of noise and stressful environment, we try to cap it at 5 hours.
So it's far fewer people than some of the musical festivals that you...
Oh, yeah. Fewer than that, but the principles are the same.
Yeah.
So, a large club.
I see. So it's sort of like...
Get the doors open, got to get everybody on stage on time, got to have everything run on time, and then got to get everybody out in an efficient manner.
So in addition to making sure everything's on wheels and having a good team, what have you taken from your days as a roadie for Twisted Sister that's been helpful to you in the last few weeks?
Aside from the tools of the trade, it's also understanding kind of the psychology of human behavior, of how people will move through a space, how people will move through a line, how they'll move through a queue, and also understanding people will always come early. When I was a fan and going to the shows as a fan, I would get there hours early. Even if I had a ticket, I'd get there hours and hours early because I just had to be first. And very similarly with the vaccination clinics, folks will, even if with an appointment, they will show up an hour early. They will show up 2 hours early. They're just convinced that somehow they've got to be there early, and they will sit out in the parking lot. For us, we soft open. So if we have that first appointment at 9 o'clock, we know those early birds are going to be out there. And so we will always soft open a half hour early, and we get the jump on those early birds. And that just means as the pod starts to ramp up and move, we don't fall as behind. If we'd open right at 9 and we were strict about it and said, nope, doors open at 9 and we're not letting anybody in before 9, I can guarantee you we could have 50, 60 people outside waiting in line.
And then you're backed up.
Right. We never really ever get caught up. Now, it's okay to have a line, and sometimes we do. But when you figure there are days where we're cranking 150 people every 15 minutes, if you will, if we get backed up for 5, 10, 15 minutes, that's 50, 100, 150 more people backing up in that queue. So it's really important to keep the pod running, keep those bottlenecks to a minimum, and make sure that we keep on that time schedule.
Now, I'm thinking back to something you said about, 5 hours is a good amount because of the fatigue of the staff. Occurs to me, you may have some thoughts about how you keep the esprit de corps going during this intense operation, and whether you learn things from prior experiences. How do you keep the team focused on the job, excited, happy, positive? What are your tricks there?
Well, the public helps us with that. When we get compliments, when people thank us, I think that really goes a long way to keep everyone's spirits up. We do have catering, which definitely keeps folks' spirits up. I don't know anyone who doesn't like snacks and a nice lunch. And one of the things that I learned on the road is it's very, very rare, even on a long tour, for you to do more than 4 shows in a row. Usually you'll do 4 shows on a tour. You'll have a day of rest or a day of travel in between, and then you'll have 4 more. So when we first started, we tried not to have more than 4 pods in a row. And we tried to not schedule everyone at every single pod, just to give us that physical and mental rest. Right now, we've got pods 4 or 5 days a week. We have sometimes 2 different locations on one day. So we are starting to get spread a little bit thin. And so we're trying to at least schedule it so that we don't have to work every single pod every day in a row. It gives you that break in between. And my hope is to bring on many more personnel, particularly people who have been out of work, who maybe bring that same skill set that I have, who will be able to help relieve some of the public health staff from these duties so that the non-clinical work can be carried on, and the public health folks can kind of rest their minds, rest their bodies for a little while. This is going to go on for months.
Yeah. Well, I know from having worked with you, Terry, how much fun it is to work with you, and how you bring just sort of a joy to the work that you do that makes it just really a great experience for people.
Well, thank you very much. I take a lot of pride in my pods. I do run a tight ship. But, I get the doors open on time. We get the people move through. And, we really have a great team in Baltimore County. So I'm very proud of this county. All the agencies that have been a part of it, all of these agencies that have come forward and helped us to get this mission done. And for me, it's very rewarding to walk into a pod that I'm not running and have someone from the fire department maybe running the pod with a health department person. And I can't tell in the pod who comes from what agency anymore. I can't pick out who's from the health department and who's from rec and parks, or from public schools, or from even an agency nurse. Everybody has just really embraced it, blended really well. And you walk into a Baltimore County pod and you're at a Baltimore County pod. So you're going to see folks from all different agencies and all across the board, and everybody's just working really well as a team. So it's been very rewarding for me personally, and I know for our county residents, they appreciate it as well.
Well, that's great. I'm going to just ask you this question here at the end here, because I can't resist. Since this story came out, since everybody knows you used to help with the tours of Twisted Sister. Have you heard people have been making any kind of jokes or puns for you based on their greatest hits?
Oh, nonstop. Well, the Baltimore Sun ran the headline, I want a shot. Then I've heard, well, I guess they are going to take it. I've had about half a dozen people ask me, well, are you going to take it now? And I can officially say yes. As far as COVID vaccine, we're going to take it. And we want you to take it too.
Fantastic. That is the answer to the I'm not going to take it anymore anthem. There you go. Terry Sapp, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Public Health on Call is produced by Josh Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, C.N. Oates, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo and Neiman Outland. Social media support from Brenda Haggader, Grace Holes Fernandez, and Caroline Wong. Thank you for listening.